I'll let you know when it's live. And we're live.
Good evening and welcome to the presentation tonight for the public meeting regarding allowing chickens inside the village boundaries of the Township of Russell. So before we start, we would like to mention a few things. So the first thing that I would like to mention is that the purpose of this meeting is really to gather comments from the public. So there's no decision that will be made tonight, and it's really to hear your questions and concern regarding what's being proposed. You could ask questions as we go. By using the chat box, you could type your question and we will answer the question at the end of the presentation. Just note that it takes a couple of minutes for us to see the question. So if you want to enter it as we go, that would be preferable, so we won't miss any of the questions that are asked. So we will answer all the questions at the end of the presentation. So I'll introduce Alex Jolicoeur, the planner from the Township of Russell, that will proceed with the presentation. We also have Mina and Claire Roy that are with us tonight with the planning department as well, and we'll try our best to answer all your questions. So Alex, if you want to start the meeting.
All right, so I'm just going to share my screen so you can see the presentation. I've heard that it takes a little minute for it to come up. So as Dominique mentioned, we're just talking about backyard hens. So what we're going to talk about a little bit is an introduction, a little bit of a background around the research that we did and the surveys that we've done. We're going to talk about existing policies, a little bit of considerations of other cities, and the considerations that went into drafting our bylaw. We're then going to go on to the draft provisions, regulations, and permits, and then we're going to follow that with the question period. So recent trends indicate that many cities across Canada have adopted ordinances allowing residents to raise a limited number of chickens on residential properties. Some of these cities include Toronto, Brampton, Kingston, Orillia, Richmond, Surrey, Vancouver, and others. The Township of Russell has received a high amount of interest in backyard chickens and is proposing a bylaw to allow a limited number of hens on larger residential properties, and we're proposing a temporary pilot project to allow hens on small to mid-sized residential lots. So, as a bit of a background, hens are not a simple yes or no question. People have a variety of perspectives on whether backyard hens should be permitted or not. We did a lot of research on existing communities with urban hen policies, and we're able to see some of the successes, some of the failures, and some of the lessons learned from those other municipalities. We felt that doing this research into what other municipalities had done gave us more information, which allows us to make a better informed decision. And we're looking at the impact to the environment and human health, as well as kind of the local sustainability. So currently, backyard hens are only permitted in areas zoned agricultural and in areas zoned rural residential where the lot size is greater than 2 hectares. So in agricultural zones, there's no minimum lot size for an agricultural use, including raising of chickens. In rural residential, we allow hobby farms on properties that are 2 hectares, so that's about 5 acres or more, and so that would allow chickens, but it obviously doesn't currently allow chickens inside of village boundaries or on smaller rural residential properties. So the goal of the proposed bylaw is to allow hens inside village boundaries. So you can see in the maps here the village boundaries. The areas that are zoned residential are shown in the light yellow color. So we're going to kind of discuss the proposed provisions. We want to gather comments from the public, and then we want to report to council on what we found and what the comments from the public were. So we did conduct 2 surveys. The initial survey had 531 participants. The second survey had 424 participants. Those in favor of hens in residential areas were about 71% of people. 21% of respondents were against hens in urban areas, and 8% were unsure. So we also asked in our survey, if your neighbor wanted to have hens, would you want to be notified? So this is from survey results of the second survey, I believe. And in 2019, the survey said that 45% of people were in favor of receiving notice if their neighbor wanted to have hens. 48% were against and 7% were unsure. In 2020, we had similar results. 40% were in favor, 55% were against, and 5% were unsure. We used this to inform when we were drafting our bylaw when we would require neighbors to be notified and consent from neighbors. We also asked survey respondents, if chickens were permitted, would you choose to own backyard hens? 47% of respondents were in favor. 36% were saying no, they did not want to have backyard hens, and 17% were unsure. So we also asked people, if the township were to allow backyard hens, would you want the township to, and then we said select all that apply. We wanted to see what types of regulations people felt should be in place. And 307 respondents indicated that we should regulate the number of hens. 242 respondents indicated we should regulate the minimum lot size. 159 respondents said we should regulate setbacks for neighbors. 182 respondents said we should implement permits. 195 respondents indicate we should establish inspections. 72 respondents indicated no regulations, and 16 respondents indicated other. So we also asked people, what do you feel is the maximum number of hens that a resident should be allowed to keep? And we did get a variety of responses, and those included 1 to 5 hens, that was 162%, 6 to 10 hens, 43 respondents, and should be determined by lot size, 159, no limit, 8 respondents, and other, 51. We asked respondents what their primary concerns were with the township allowing backyard hens in residential zones. And the results were 152 said noise, 202 said odors, 103 said illness/disease, 76 said visual, 38 said safety, 176 said nuisance predators, 138 none, 21 said other. So the considerations that we put into drafting our bylaw were, sorry, give me a second, just got to catch up with my notes. So this is a list we took into consideration when creating the bylaw on the regulation of hens in residential areas. The focus was to create minimal nuisance and damage to neighboring properties while ensuring the health of the environment and people weren't affected. So it's a balancing act, and we tried to incorporate that into the draft, but we are still looking for feedback from the public on the draft that we prepared. So this is some of the general provisions that are proposed in the draft bylaw. So in the village boundary, no person shall keep a rooster. No person shall operate a hen coop anywhere within the township unless he or she has first obtained a hen coop license. This does not include agricultural parcels or rural residential parcels that are large enough for a hobby farm. So those are still treated separately because they don't need a backyard hen license. Hens shall be kept in the hen house between 9 p.m. and 6 a.m. and any excess amount of manure must be disposed of. The hens cannot be slaughtered or disposed of on a residential property, and hens must be female egg-laying hens, minimum 4 months of age. So hens that are at the end of their life or that are intended to be butchered must be delivered to a pound keeper, farm, veterinarian, abattoir, or other facility with the legal ability to dispose of them. So the selling of eggs or other products derived from hens is prohibited. The maximum hen house run and manure storage size is a total of 10 square meters. Both the hen house and the run area are required to be fully enclosed on all sides and above. So with fencing, chicken wire, or roof covering, it is to be constructed to prevent the hens' escape and prevent entry by intruders/predators. Hen coops and runs are only permitted in rear yards. So if you can see the image on the slide here, basically it has to be behind the building, so further from the street than the existing dwelling on the property, and it can't be closer to, like, it can't be along the side lot line. Hen coops will only be permitted in single family and semi-detached dwellings, so on lots with, I should say. Hen coops shall not be permitted on rented properties unless they have documented consent of the property owner. Township staff, it should be noted for the pilot project. This is for the smaller lots. We can remove participants from the project with 30 days written notice. So these are some examples of hen coops. As you can see, the enclosures are fully enclosed to prevent escape and attack from predators. So these, obviously, hen coops can absolutely be designed so that they are not detracting visually from the aesthetic qualities and village character of the township of Russell, and we think that that can be done in a responsible way. So these are regulations that apply to lots that are 3,000 square meters and greater. So we're proposing to limit the number of hens to 5 hens on residential properties greater than 3,000 square meters, and enclosures for those hens must meet the following setbacks. They must be minimum 10 meters from the rear lot line and 10 meters from any side lot line. They must be 3 meters from all habitable room windows and doors. They need to be 15 meters from schools, businesses, and places of worship. And they need to be 3 meters from septic tank and easements. Manure storage has to be 3 meters from property lines, windows, and doors. In addition, there must be a minimum 3 meter setback. Oh, I already said that one. So larger lots will not require written consent of all abutting property owners. So this is the proposed regulations for the pilot project. So for smaller lots between 500 square meters and 2,999 square meters, we're proposing a pilot project. This would be on a 12-month trial basis, and we would allow a maximum of 3 hens on lots between 500 square meters and 2,999 square meters. There would be a limited number of pilot project backyard hen licenses available, so 5 licenses within the village of Embrun, 5 within the village of Russell, 5 within the village of Marionville, and 5 within the village of Limoges. For the purposes of the pilot project, licenses will not be issued for abutting properties. So if your neighbor already has a pilot project license for backyard hens, and you would only be eligible for a pilot project license. We wouldn't be able to issue them side by side. Pilot project licenses will be issued on a first come first served basis based on when we receive complete applications for the license. So for the pilot project, all applicants must obtain written consent from neighbors of all abutting properties through the neighbor consent form. If at a later time a neighbor wishes to withdraw their consent, they may do so by making an official complaint to a bylaw. And if the coop is less than 10 meters from a lot line, the rear yard of the property or the portion of the rear yard that's used for the coop must be fenced with a fence minimum 1.8 meters in height. An enclosure for keeping hens as part of the pilot project shall include the following setbacks: from rear lot line and side lot line, 3 meters, from all habitable room windows and doors, 3 meters, from schools, businesses, and places of worship, 15 meters, from septic tanks and easements, 3 meters, and manure storage must remain 3 meters from property lines, windows, and doors. So just a summary of the permit types. There'll be permits for lots between 500 square meters and 2,999 square meters, and those will be pilot project license, and they will be on a 12-month trial basis. There's a possibility of renewing that pilot project or making those regulations permanent as we near the end of the pilot project program. We'll have to review and see how it's going, and we'll bring a report to council. For those permits, you will need to obtain neighbor consent form of all abutting properties. Permits will also be available for lots 3,000 square meters and greater. These are permanent license. They do not require renewal, and they do not require neighbor consent forms be completed. So the next step are to incorporate and address any further outstanding questions and concerns made in the public meeting within the Urban Hen bylaw, present the bylaw to council, wait for council to make a final decision on approving or refusing the bylaw. So now we're at our question period. So I'm just going to close that the presentation for now, so that I can see your questions.
It looks like there's only 2 questions so far.
Okay.
First one being, we are outside the village boundary, considered rural residential, but don't have 5 acres, only 2. Does this apply to us?
So absolutely. So you would be eligible, if this is approved, for the permanent license type to allow a maximum of 5 backyard hens. We're proposing that these regulations for backyard hens apply to all residential designations where there's a single family or a semi-detached dwelling. And so that would include rural residential.
Okay, and the next question is, I think Dominic replied to it. Why not determine number of hens per lot size or occupants?
So a little bit of that was around establishing setbacks. So obviously we wanted to establish kind of setbacks regardless of lot size, so that it gave some certainty to neighboring property owners. And in doing so, we wanted to set an expectation around, you know, if there's 3 hens, there's a different potential impact than if there's 20 hens. And so by having the setbacks and a set number of hens, it allows us to give some certainty to neighboring property owners. Additionally, in terms of the number of occupants, obviously you can have a small lot and have a large number of occupants potentially. And so we wanted to make sure that it was based on the lot size and the potential impact on neighboring property owners, as well as how many hens a household wanted to have. Mina, did a lot of the background research. So Mina, is there any other reason that we chose to determine the number of hens as a set number for the two categories of lot sizes rather than kind of a scaled?
I think you covered most of it. A lot of my research was done on other municipalities, and they specifically also focused on lot size. So we're trying it like that first. We can move on to the next question. The next one is, are you interested in a volunteer committee?
So maybe I'll ask a clarifying question and we can come back to that. Like a volunteer committee to offer what types of information? Like would it be a volunteer committee to comment on the bylaw or something else? I'm not clear on what the intention is. Right now, what's proposed is that the bylaw will be enforced by our Public Safety and Bylaw Enforcement Department, and they would do the inspections and the reviews of permits. In terms of commenting on the bylaw, we're accepting comments from everyone. We've already drafted a draft bylaw, so we're not looking necessarily for a volunteer committee to put together a bylaw. Maybe you can clarify, maybe if I didn't answer it, maybe that can help.
Okay, and the next question is from Bill from Heritage Road, Russell. Does behind a detached garage count as behind the home? It will be behind the house, but on the side of the lot due to the position of the home.
So obviously without seeing like a plan of what you're proposing, I think I know what you're referring to, Bill. Basically, it would have to meet the setbacks for the lot size and the number of hens that you're proposing. And so there are setbacks from side lot lines as well as setbacks from the rear lot line. I hope that clarifies things. If you're on Heritage Road in Russell, so if I'm not sure of your lot size, but I know Heritage Road has some of the larger parcels. If you're 3,000 square meters or more, you would just need to make sure that that coop is 10 meters from the side lot line and 10 meters from the rear lot line, even if that ended up falling behind the garage.
Okay. So, and the next question is, I don't know if it's more of a comment. It says, are you serious? Written permission from all abutting neighbors? Do you ask permission of your neighbors when you buy a dog? I see plenty of those left outside to bark that are far more of a nuisance than 3 hens. Seems like an unneeded nuisance on potential hen owners and an administrative burden for the township.
So I'm going to respond a little bit. So the written permission from all abutting neighbors is only required for the pilot project, and that's on lots that are between 500 square meters and 2,999 square meters. And the reason that we have recommended in the draft that that be required is simply because we want to make sure that on those smaller lots, neighbors are aware and are consenting to those hens, because we want to see that pilot project be successful. So in order to try and make it as successful as possible, that's what we're requiring at this time, or what we're proposing be required. Obviously, we're accepting comments on the draft. So we hear your comment and we hear that yes, sometimes a neighbor can have a dog that can bark quite a bit, and you don't need permission from neighboring property owners to have a dog. However, the backyard hen bylaw is something new, and on smaller lots, we want to make sure we're getting the balance right. So that's why we're proposing it for those smaller and mid-sized lots that you'd need that written permission from neighboring property owners.
The next question is, what would the cost be to obtain a permit? Also, how will the township deal with potential complaints?
So we haven't determined what the cost would be to obtain a permit. At this time, we're just drafting the provisions. And obviously our costs to obtain a permit are generally based on the time that it takes staff to review a permit application and do any necessary inspections. So that's something that'll come a little later when or if council approves to go ahead with the backyard hens bylaw. In terms of how the township will deal with potential complaints, so when we do receive complaints about any issue in the township, which is regulated by the township, we generally conduct an investigation. So we'll do an inspection, and we'll see if the complaint it contravenes our bylaw. So we want to make sure that everything, the way the hens are being kept, where the coop is located, how the manure is stored, how much manure is stored on site, meets our hen bylaw once approved, and that's how we'd address complaints. So if we receive a complaint and we conduct an inspection and everything on the property meets the regulations that are in our backyard hen bylaw, then the property owner might be advised, we've received a complaint about noise or odor, and we might make some suggestions on dealing with that. However, we wouldn't necessarily be asking them to or forcing them to make any changes because it meets our bylaw. However, if when we did the inspection we found that they had they contravened our bylaw in any way, so they had too many hens, the coop was too close to the lot line, or they didn't have a permit, for example, then we would ask them to take actions to rectify that and come into compliance with our bylaw.
The next question is, can the 10 meter from the property line be waived with neighbor consent?
So what's proposed right now, no. The setbacks that are within the draft bylaw can't be waived with neighbor consent. So those are setbacks that are required. Again, we're having our public meeting now so we can hear from members of the public if they feel that those setbacks are too large, too small. That's why we're here tonight. So if you feel 10 meters is too large of a setback, you can propose an alternative setback and maybe explain a little bit why you feel the 10 meters is too large of a setback and why the proposed setback would be better. Again, what we tried to do is balance considerations from people who said they wanted to have backyard hens and considerations from people who said they did not feel that there should be backyard hens within residential areas of the villages. So that we'll try to strike that balance, but we're willing to consider making some adjustments.
I think the next one is just a comment more than anything. You seem a lot more into implementing laws and not so much into well-being of chicken and biosecurity.
So, I mean, really, our role as a municipality is we can regulate certain things. In terms of the well-being of the chickens, I mean, we do have some requirements in the bylaw around the minimum number of hens. Like, I think we had put in there that you can't have a single hen because they are a social animal. They don't like to be alone. However, some of the other considerations, I mean, we're not experts in chicken health and happiness. And realistically, when anyone buys an animal or a pet, it's in part their responsibility to look into making sure and they're looking out for the well-being of their chickens or their other pets. We do also have an animal care and control bylaw, which is a separate bylaw, which requires that all animals that are kept within the township of Russell have to be kept in a way that is safe and healthy for the animals as well as people. So that's kind of a separate, more general regulation, but it would also apply, I think, to chickens.
The next question is, should every permit be evaluated for proper locations and approved by bylaws before install?
So every permit will be evaluated by staff before we issue a permit to make sure that it is in compliance with the bylaw if it's approved. This is the same process that kind of goes into sign permits or permits for a shed if it's large enough to require a permit. So we do review all permits. Permits won't just be you come in, you say well, you want backyard hens, and we say go. We want to know where they're going to be placed, and we're asking for a plan showing where the coop is going to be located on the property before we issue that permit.
I think the next one is just a comment. To be the ongoing voice of the interested population in having urban hens. So we'll move on to the next one. In my rear neighbor is an apartment. Do I need the permission of every household in the building?
Oh, that is a very good question. I think I'm going to make a note of that because I don't think that came up in our internal discussion when we were looking at this. We talked about every abutting property owner, but obviously if it's an apartment building and it's owned by one owner, then that's obviously that one owner's permission. But if it was a condo building, each person owns their own unit, and that gets a little trickier. So I'm just going to make a note here. Just give me a second. So that's obviously we're going to have to think about that and work that into our draft. Again, the written permission is only required for the pilot project permits, not for the permanent permits.
So the next question is, what education do you plan for the inspectors? So inspectors will obviously be familiar with our bylaw, and they will be going on site to do inspections of the coops and hens to ensure that they meet our bylaw. However, they are not going to be agricultural experts. These are not going to be veterinarians or anything like that. They are there to ensure that the coop location, as well as the number of hens and construction of the coop, meets our bylaw. So I hope that helps answer your question. I'm not sure what education you were kind of looking for inspectors to have. If you have kind of a suggestion on additional information that inspectors should have, you can always make a suggestion. However, again, our inspectors are looking for compliance with regards to our bylaw specifically, not for the health of hens. Because that would be more of an expertise field like a veterinarian. I think the next one is more of a comment. Who has a lot over 2,999 meters squared in the village? Seriously, 3 hens is a laugh.
Yeah, so we don't need to answer that comment.
Okay, so the next one is from Stephanie. 10 meters from a property line essentially rules out everyone living within the subdivisions. How is this distance reached, and can it be evaluated on a case-by-case basis?
Okay, so Stephanie, in the subdivisions, you'd most likely be looking at the pilot project licenses, because most subdivision lots will not be 3,000 square meters or over unless you're in one of the older subdivisions that have lots that are about 3/4 of an acre or more. So the setbacks in the pilot project program for lots between 500 square meters and 2,999 square meters are 3 meters from the property line. And that distance was reached in considering the impact on potential neighboring property owners, as well as kind of the rear yard setbacks. We know that the minimum depth for most rear yards is 7.5 meters, which does allow you to locate a hen coop on that within that 7.5 meters and maintain the 3 meters from your rear lot line and 3 meters from windows and doors of the house. So that was some of our consideration in establishing the 3 meters. In terms of the 10 meters, we went with a larger setbacks on those larger properties that are 3/4 of an acre or more. And this was so that we could allow a little bit more flexibility in terms of not requiring that written permission from neighboring property owners. And so that we could allow a slightly greater number of hens. So we wouldn't be evaluating distances on a case-by-case basis, but as previously mentioned, we are open to hearing from members of the public on potential alternative setbacks. We just want to strike that balance between the people who want to have chickens in their backyard and potential neighbors who may not want to be impacted by chickens.
Okay. The next two, I believe, are just comments. It's saying it's disappointing there is a limit on lot size. I can move on to the next one. You're comparing chickens to dogs, pets. Obviously, this is a proof of lack of education. Scary. I'll skip to the next one.
Just a second. I don't think I'm going to respond to that question. Comment more. We didn't compare chickens to the dog pet. I think the person that asked the question did compare the chickens with dog pets, so I would probably ignore that comment.
Okay, and then the next one, I think it was answered. My rear neighbor has an apartment. Do I need the permission of every household in the building? Yes, and like Alex said, we'll have to look into that a little more as we didn't consider that.
So we asked a follow-up question.
Yeah. So further to this, what about neighbors that are places of worship or other community buildings?
So right now the setback to places of worship or places of business is larger. It's 15 meters. And in the pilot project, we are still, right now, my understanding was that you would still need permission from that neighboring property owner. Oftentimes for a place of worship or other community building, there is an individual who has the ability to provide permission on behalf of the community buildings or the places of worship. I hope that answers your question, but I will make a note to make sure that's clear in our bylaw.
Okay. So the next question, why not follow Toronto, less rural limits to 4 hens per property?
So, I mean, we looked, or Mina, I should say, looked at a lot of comparables, and we did find quite a diversity of different maximums for hens, and each bylaw is unique. So some bylaws allow more hens, however, their distances to property lines might be larger, or they might have different provisions around fencing or permission from neighbors. Or, so what we've crafted is based on those comparables we found from a variety of other jurisdictions. And again, we're kind of on both sides of the 4. On smaller to mid-sized properties, we're proposing 3 hens, but on the larger properties over 3,000 square meters, we are proposing 5 hens. So again, that was kind of to reflect the fact that on our surveys, we had heard from people that the number of hens should be in part scaled to the lot size. So again, we didn't want to make it a sliding scale so that if you had an extra 10 square meters, you could have an extra chicken. We did kind of break it down into 2 categories, but we did want to reflect that on a larger property, having a few more chickens is likely not going to have a big impact.
It looks like there are no more questions.
So I think we covered pretty much all the questions. Unless we'll give it more like another 1 minute maybe to see if there's people that we ask some questions to be clarified. So if, for example, the volunteer committee, we ask it would be what the person think that the mandate of the committee would be. And then when they've mentioned that it was disappointing that there's a limit on lot size, I think we pretty much covered all the lot size. So I'm just asking the person if they could clarify their comment. And we've answered the one for Toronto. So there's a lot of things that are covered in the bylaw. So if the people that are interested to receive a copy of the bylaw, they could for sure email us and we could give them a copy of the bylaw so they could review that. We're not talking just about what we mentioned tonight. It's a lot more detail in the bylaw that what we've covered. So maybe it could answer as well some question, but there was a really good question about if it's a building apartment or if it's a place of worship, how we're gonna address that question about getting the approval for the neighbor. And I think this is something that we will have to include and see how we're gonna deal with those situations. So I see that there's no more question. So we are like we have the information on the webpage. So I strongly suggest that if people again want to have the copy of the bylaw, you could send us an email. And I think we have another question. How long before this might become a bylaw, or will it go automatically to the pilot program? So I'll answer that question. So based on the feedback of the public, we had a presentation that was done prior in French tonight at 6. So we will propose the bylaw to members of council for decision on August 10th. So at the August 10th meeting. Therefore, the pilot project won't be able to start before this bylaw is approved or not in front of council. So it's going to be presented to members of council on August 10th. There's another one that came up, but I don't know if Mina, you want to.
Sure. The follow-up recommendations is to reduce the distance from the property line of larger properties to 3 meters from consent and get the consent of neighbors from the 10 meters, without the 10 meters.
So I think that's an interesting suggestion, and I think that we'll note that and we'll have to discuss it. Obviously, reducing the setback to 3 meters with consent of the neighbor really takes into consideration that the neighbor's okay with it. However, it does raise the question, and this is something we have discussed, what if the neighbor changes, the neighbor moves, sells the house, or if they want to withdraw that consent at a later date. It does become a little more complicated, but it is definitely something that I think we can think about and we can talk about as a team.
There's another question. Why not another survey re this proposal?
So there's been a lot of surveys that were conducted for the last 2 years, and the answers were pretty much the same. So what I would strongly suggest, if that person could, the anonymous person that is asking questions regarding the bylaw could be sent to anybody that would require the draft of the bylaw, and people could make comment to the bylaw that is being proposed. So this is really more effective than having a survey again. I will, in the announcement box, put my email as a reference. If people want to send me directly an email, I would gladly send them a copy of the bylaw. And for us, it's a lot easier as well to present to council comments that we receive on the actual bylaw compared to just result from a survey. So I will make in the chat box, I will include my email so that people could send me directly questions, or if they want to have a copy of the bylaw, I will share the bylaw that is being proposed.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Nina.
there's another question. Are the results of the 2 previous surveys available to the public?
Yes, again, if you want to have the result of the survey, we could for sure share them. They are compiled, so there's no secret. So if Cindy, you want to send me an email, I'll share my email in the chat box.
Okay, and the next one was based on a previous question. Recommendations is to reduce the distance from the property line of larger properties to 3 meters with consent of neighbors and 10 meters without. Then that's the risk the homeowner takes and has to move the coop if the neighbor withdraws their consent.
That gets complicated in terms of our ability to make someone move a coop they already have a permanent license for. So again, we can discuss that as a team, and I think you raise an interesting point that maybe it can be reduced to a set lower distance from the property line if they have consent of neighbors, and that way kind of it gives a little bit more flexibility, but we'll have to consider kind of the impacts on this administrative kind of complexity of that, as well as the risks. Again, if a homeowner or a neighbor withdraws their consent, then what's our authority under the Municipal Act to have them move the coop?
Looks like there's no new questions.
So I have shared my email with members of the public that would like to ask questions or receive any other comments. And I think we have one more question that just came in.
So what if your lot is under 3,000 meters squared, but are a side lot? Do you require permission from neighbors residing across the street, although they technically do not abut our property?
Okay, so that's a good question. We included in our draft bylaw definitions, and our definition of abutting property is a property that includes a shared lot line or a portion of the lot line that is shared. So obviously, if you're an exterior, you have a corner lot with an exterior side yard, then on that side of your property you do not have an abutting neighbor. So you would still need permission from abutting property owners to the rear and to the other side of your property, but we're not going to ask you to go to the other side of the street, and that's just based on our definition of abutting properties, which does not include anybody who's not directly against one of your lot lines.
The next one is more of a comment. Why is this called a consultation if bylaw is already done?
So I'll just explain a little bit. So when we're preparing for a community consultation, it's really helpful to have a draft bylaw. So the bylaw is not done, it's not approved. We just have a draft and we're presenting that draft so we can get feedback on it from the public. When we do public consultations before we've drafted a bylaw, they would be similar to our survey where we're asking for kind of some feedback, but we can't really get feedback on detailed proposals of what we think would work. So what we've drafted is based on our research. This is what we think will work, but it is still very much a draft. At the end of the day, this is not finalized. This is not exactly what's being presented to council. We're still working on it, and that's why we're here tonight is to get feedback on that draft. So yes, we've completed a draft, but that's to help present the community with our baseline. This is where we're starting our discussion, and we're going from there.
The next question is from Martin. What if our abutting property is a township park?
There's a lot of good questions about abutting properties. And so that one I think we'll have to address in our bylaw as well, and we'll have to discuss that with the Director of Parks and Rec to see kind of where that falls. again, I don't know who's coming up with all these questions about abutting properties, but a lot of things we obviously didn't think of when we were preparing the draft.
Doesn't seem like there's any more questions.
So while we're giving it a couple more minutes to see if any more questions come in, because they've been coming in pretty steady, I just want to thank everybody for coming out tonight and asking questions that I think will help really improve our bylaw. I think when we get feedback from the public and we get these detailed questions about permission from neighboring property owners and things like that, it really allows us to work on finessing that draft and making some changes based on those comments. Just wait, because we're still getting lots of questions.
There's a new one.
A new question.
This was very informative. Thank you for organizing this.
Thank you. We tried, and we hope that anybody who doesn't feel they got enough information tonight will contact us so we can share the draft bylaw with them, hopefully with the changes based on some of the comments and questions we received tonight, so that we can receive even more feedback.
So I think we're pretty much done with all the questions. So again, I did share my email, and I don't know if everybody saw it, but it's easy to find on the website of the Township of Russell as well. But it's I'll just give mine, and then I'll share the email with Mina and Alex afterwards. So my email is dominiquetremblay@russell.ca. Like I've mentioned, it's easy to find on the website, and if you have questions or concerns, or if you just want to have a copy of the surveys, the result, or if you want to have a copy of the bylaw to review in detail all the information and provisions that are included in the bylaw, you're more than welcome to email me, and I will share the information. The next step is that we will for sure meet again with staff to make sure that we have included the concern and comments that were discussed tonight. And I think, like Alex mentioned, that there was a lot of good questions that were not pretty clear in the draft bylaw, but we will have to address when the neighboring property is either a public property, a church, or an apartment building. So when there are multiple ownership, we would have to address this in the bylaw and see how the consent would work. So this is really productive, and compared to what was mentioned in the comment, this is not a done deal. As Alex mentioned, the proposed bylaw is just basically for helping us to see where we're going to go and how to adjust it based from the public meeting and moving forward to council. So thank you again, and I don't think there's more questions. So we are, I think, done for the night. And I think, yeah. So if you don't hesitate, if you have concern, just let us know, and we will help as much as possible. So I think that's pretty much it. Thank you, member of the public. Thank you, staff, for the research. Like we've mentioned, again, we're not professionals in chickens and hens, and we've learned as much as possible to try to get something that would work eventually in the township. And let's not forget, this is something that is not done in Prescott Russell. It's not even done at the City of Ottawa. So we're really proactive in trying to, and we heard what you had to say, and we're trying as much as possible to include all of your concern and comments in the draft bylaw that will be presented to council on August 10th. So thank you so much again and have a great summer.